go.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 115 of CMD Tower's Brews and Builds. I'm MrComboNumber5, and my fellow host was entangled in a logic knot during the drinkathon BigTuck.
Wow. I don't think we're gonna have to litigate that evening at any point, right? Do we mercifully just make it through that?
Yes, even though, Jim annually, our play group, even before the channel existed, has had an annual EDH tournament. But, to kind of keep, because we do have some spikier players in our group, we used to have a pro player in our play group. And so one of the rules that we made is you can only play a commander once and a deck once. So you can't play your own Thrasios deck, then borrow someone else's. So it kind of makes the combo players or the competitive players have to branch out a little bit, and we all borrow decks. But then the big one is that we usually have some sort of alcohol consumption-based rules. So hopefully, if you are a combo player, like if you infinite combo, you have to finish your drink.
Right.
To be able to complete the combo. And so ideally, your, let's just call it your mental intellect degrades as the night goes on, and maybe you don't become as spikier as a player. Maybe you make some mistakes.
So there's those rules, but then because me and MrCombo both have substance abuse issues, there is a lot of outside of the rules drinking to be had as well.
Yes, because it's just, you're just sitting there casually like drinking, and then it's like, oh, you have to drink for this, you have to drink for that. So anyways, we had our tournament. It was a load of fun, but the one thing that me and Tuck, because we were so excited to see each other, because it had been 9 months or so in real life, that we forgot to enforce any of the rules. So we had one of our groups come up from Joplin. We mentioned something, but then the thing is at the end of the night, because we have prizes. So we had like a full art meat hook massacre out there. We had
Ragnar out of nowhere that I ended up with somehow, even though I think I got second to last.
Wait, you got Ragnar?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Do you not remember that?
So anyways,
I was like, I don't remember. Okay, so the joke is we have on our other podcast that we do like our weekly game recaps, and we didn't do one the week after, which is good because of the 8 or whatever games that we played, I probably only remember details of maybe 3 or 4 succinctly. So
I remember all the games I infinite comboed on because I was sober for them. So anyways, we have some grand prizes for the championship table, but the goal, and actually kind of like what we do, is that everyone leaves the event with a prize. Everyone leaves with a legendary that they have to build by the next year's event. So it kind of gives like a little bit of skin in the game, but not really if you just want to have fun. But me and Tuck completely blanked out, and our a little bit more tuned group from southern Missouri, their play group actually has ultra budget brews from EDH Rec. We forgot to remind them at the end of the night, hey, anyone that hadn't been drinking, you're not at the championship table, because obviously you could still play Magic with a coherent thought. So we realized that the next day, and so yes, I think all litigation, we are wiping the slate clean. We are still going to build it. I can't remember which one I got. I have like a pile of cards on my other table, so we'll have to see.
And somehow I ended up with the only card there that was on the reserved list for some reason. I remember walking and stumbling up and being like, how is this still here? And everyone's like, oh, I was like, oh, I'm taking this before someone says anything differently.
Oh, man. Well, guys, if you can't tell, we do have a special guest on. This is the, technically recordings might be a little wonky, but this is the first Brews and Builds of December Guestathon. Guestcember? Yes. So we actually have Jim from Spike Feeders on. Jim, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us. You are also one of our Canadian friends, correct?
I am. I'm from Manitoba, Canada. That's the Missouri of the North.
A lot of combo players there, huh? Interesting.
Yeah. Read into that whatever you want.
Yeah. No,
so
awesome.
The big question I have is, I've never asked any of our Canadian friends about this. Obviously, Thanksgiving is kind of like a U.S. thing. Do you guys do anything for Thanksgiving? Just because it's like, oh, they're celebrating it. Let's eat turkey and eat like fat Americans.
Oh, it's my time to shine. You know when you have that like one fact in your brain, and then like somebody asks you about it, and you're like, yes. That's me right now. Okay, so Canadian Thanksgiving is in October, and it's a pirate holiday.
What?
Yes, it is. So Martin Frobisher, who was an explorer and a pirate, was exploring the Northwest Passage. I realize I could be saying anything right now, and you'd be like,
"Oh, absolutely, we're going to eat it up."
I mean, and I just assume that you're going to talk about like he invented poutine, and his like favorite animal was a moose, and all this other stuff, right? Like,
I mean, it's true, but
it's true, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but like literally, you can Google this right now. This is like 100% legitimate. This is the truth. Pirate and an explorer. He was exploring the Northwest Passage, came back early, had a whole feast, and had a feast with his town. And then it actually started 40 years before American Thanksgiving. And it's in October every year.
So the question I have on this, just because I myself have gotten into, we'll call it quasi-fictional, historical, like cinema. I was like watching Vikings, and I honestly didn't realize that the Vikings made it all the way to Canada, like North America back then. So is this gentleman, was that a Nordic Viking that kind of did this?
No, just a French explorer.
Okay.
Of course. The French, they're always over here. And also,
I think he's French. Don't quote me on that. If you're actually Googling this and he's not French, then don't hold me to that. The rest of it's true, though, I swear.
I'm an old man. I don't trust the internet. So whatever you say right now is gospel. But listen, folks out there listening, it's edutainment. We're here. We're dancing for you, but we're also going to teach you some facts about things that no one knew before. So there you go.
Brews and Builds, your number one source for pirate holiday facts.
For Canadian pirate holidays.
Well, that's awesome. I obviously had no idea about that. I did see recently, I believe your Prime Minister awarded Ryan Reynolds like the Medal of Honor or something for Canada. Yeah, he got it, I think, over the weekend.
I didn't know about that.
Oh, yeah. Well,
but I'm into it.
We were too busy bereaving for Stephen Sondheim. So
yeah, really.
It was a bummer.
Yeah, you know what's crazy about that? Me and my fiance just watched that Click Click Bang movie with Andrew Garfield about Jim? Can't remember the guy's name. The guy that wrote Rent.
Yes.
So, and never seen it. And I like musicals that actually tell a story, not just musical to sing. It was very entertaining. I learned a lot. But that was actually the first time I had ever even heard of Stephen Sondheim. Never even heard of the guy. And I saw him in the movie and I was just like, oh, okay, clearly he's a big deal. I don't know why, but clearly he's a big deal, and so I'm putting stock into that. And then later that night, I'm on Screen Rant, and it's like 5 hours earlier, so I think that equated to 2 hours before we started the movie. The news was released that he died, and I was like, whoa, this is weird. Just watched a movie kind of about the guy and how he influenced the Rent creator to get to Rent, and now he's dead. So there you go. I'm always behind the curveball. I saw Godfather like 50 years later, still haven't seen Rocky.
What?
Yeah. Shan's like my girlfriend is a teacher and she's got a couple degrees, but her first degree was in film, and she like follows much different people on TikTok than I follow, right? Like she's scrolling through TikTok and she's like, it's some prop master, and he's like, if you need to know who Stephen Sondheim is, and she's like, who is out there following a prop account on TikTok and doesn't know who Stephen Sondheim is? And I'm like, yeah, can you imagine?
Well, that's hilarious. Well, Jim, you guys have been creating content forever. So if our community isn't familiar with it, how would people find your content and specifically be able to get a hold of yourself?
Yeah, if you're listening to a Magic podcast and you've never heard of the Spike Feeders, that's a channel that I run. We do all sorts of stuff. We do EDH gameplay where we're all over the power level spectrum. Our kind of MO for our gameplay series is we just play what we think is sweet. And sometimes that's like right at the tippy top of the power spectrum. And sometimes it's really casual nonsense. But we just do it to have a good time. We've got face cams running so you can see all of the table banter and stuff like that. We don't cut that out because I think it's an important part of the EDH gameplay experience. We also do a video podcast called Spike on the Mic with myself and Alex, who's another member of our group. And we do a series called Better Know Combo, where we break down one combo every episode and talk about how to play it, like how to execute the steps of the combo and how to play against it. Because we think that's an important part of understanding how to play Magic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, no, that's awesome. And if anyone, when Jim says Spike Feeders and I say Spike Feeders and Tuck does, and you still don't know, I guarantee you've seen one of their dice. Their dice are like candy corn. It's everywhere. You can't escape it. You're going to see these little lime green dice, a little cactus where I believe the number 1 should be, or is it the number 6?
Oh, there's drama there. We started out with it on the number 6. We asked Chessex, we're like, do we get it with the logo on the 1 or the logo on the 6? And they said, well, you get it with the logo on the 6 because then you want people to roll your number, your logo, right? You want people to have a good emotional reaction when they roll your number. And so we ordered them and we included them as patron rewards and everything like that. And then when the pandemic hit, they started having supply issues and they ran out of blanks because they're laser cut only on one side. And they ended up with some supply chain issues, and we couldn't get them on the 6 anymore. But they're like, well, we have it on the 1. So we ordered those. And now we have 2 versions of the dice floating around, and they are otherwise identical.
So here's how you market that. You have the one that has the 6 side, and you're like, hey, guys, this is for when you play your deck, and you're needed to roll your dice, and you need the good win. Then you have hey, if you want to salt your opponents, here's a die that the spike feeder's on the 1, so whenever they roll the 1, they just get real pissed off. So whenever your deck needs them to roll, you give them this die, and when they get the spike feeder, you get excited, but they get sad.
Right.
That's how you do it.
So if you ever see us roll dice and then check the opposite side of the die to see if it's a 6 or a 1, that's why.
Even the creators and the owners of the dice are confused.
Well, like they're so mixed up and they're otherwise identical, right? So like I just grab a handful of them and then I'm just like, oh, it's going to be a mix of the 2.
I like it.
That's pretty funny. But yeah, that's definitely where I had first seen you guys. I think I had gone to Magic Fest in 2018 in Vegas, and it was right when we had started, or 2019. Right when we had started the podcast, and I remember seeing your guys' dice throughout Vegas, and I was just like, gosh, these are really cool, like, cactus die, and I kept going around to the booths, like, looking, and I just never saw any, and then I think I found out, like, 3 months later about your guys' channel. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's where it's from. That makes more sense.
I've also seen that, and I thought it was a meme from the Final Fantasy games, because in every Final Fantasy game, there's, like, a cactus guy like this.
Yeah,
I was like, okay, that's an interesting interpretation, but what do I know?
It turns out that like the kawaii cactus thing is like a big thing. And when we originally had our meeting, our first logo was Microsoft Word clip art. And when we paid somebody to design a logo for us, we were just like, we want it to be a cactus, but we want it to look kind of cute.
Yeah.
And then that was like the only like creative direction that we gave them. So we spent like 3 hours just Googling pictures of kawaii cactuses. And,
that's so funny.
Okay, here's the best part. I literally just Googled kawaii cactus.
There's so many of them.
And autofilled dice, and it's your guys'.
That's really funny. That's hashtag SEO,
awesome.
masterclass in SEO, you know?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure when you Google CMD Tower, it just immediately pulls up like the Microsoft trash can, and then you just see your search getting put into it. I don't know. It's weird.
I thought, MrCombo, you were going to say it just immediately goes to a 503 error.
Well, guys, if you want to find out ways to support our Patreon, so maybe we can go from a 503 error message to being on page 1 of Google, you should ever do our Patreon, patreon.com/CMD Tower. We have 4 different tiers, literally from just $1 a month to get you into the Discord, get you into the collective. Plus, you get a bunch of other soft benefits, like you get entered in for deck therapy, voices. You get to play with us in the 40 Life at a Dash channel. You get entered in for giveaway entries whenever we do those each month. So there's a lot of things with it. But of course, the one that everyone's the most excited for right now is our Jund holiday sweater. Of course, Jim, you can't see the green because of my green screen. It's completely glocked it out. I am not see-through. I know you thought I was like some apparition or something. I am not. This is technology. So we are doing our sweaters. I believe by the time this posting comes out, it will be live for everyone. The sweaters are $50. It's a combed cotton. They're real nice. We only have like 15 of a few of the sizes and like 5 to 10 of some others. We only ordered about 70 of them just because we didn't want to get stuck with too many, aka #redactedbit. So be sure, go on there, pre-order. If it doesn't work with your address, or if you're in Canada, like our friend Jim or our friend Tomer, just shoot me a message or shoot the main account a message. We have a workaround for you because I think the sweaters come right around Christmas, and that's when we'll be shipping out. So anyone that shipping is not working correctly in the store, we are just going to have you select local pickup. We'll work with you via PayPal or some other payment method to be able to get your shipping address and get your shipping charge. So we are working on that. But hey, get out there, get the sweaters. I've been wearing mine almost every day because it's the softest piece of clothing I own. So yeah, they're pretty great. And second thing, we posted it in our Discord, but we do have our second playmat coming out. And yes, it was designed by Marketing Ross. And yes, it is a foil white stitched edged playmat. So we're going to be selling them, I think, for only $25. They're going to be pretty cheap. We ordered 100 of them, just like we do all of our other ones. I think those will probably get here in the beginning of January. We're not going to do any special pre-order stuff with it, just because there's no sizes with playmats. It's just the size you get's the size you get. So yeah, be looking out for the store on that, and be sure to check out the Discord if you joined, and you can see pictures of it. Now, if you're already a member of the collective, but you want to refer a frenemy, maybe a family member, you could refer them. And if you refer anyone, when they join up, have them shoot us a message on Patreon. Doesn't matter what tier they signed up for, we're going to give you a little something in return. Maybe we're going to sign your gold bordered Gaia's Cradle, which does make me cry on the inside, and I will bottle that single tier for you. Oh, Tuck, you'll like this. I played against Spencer's gold bordered lands deck yesterday. Didn't like that.
Yes!
Very, very much upsetting. We will sign that all the way up to even giving you like free sleeves, maybe a sweater. It just kind of depends on what tier your friend signed up for and just randomly what we end up picking out. Now, if you don't want to sign up for our Patreon, but you do want to get the sweater I talked about, you would like to get sleeves, I think we have Monarch tokens left and reminder tokens, a whole bunch of swag. Head over to our store, cmdtower.com/merch. There's a redacted bit that legally in the Magic world, I'm not allowed to say. And of course, our audio and video editor for Brews and Builds @_tcoats. Tyler is great. He is a big Magic enthusiast. He does this because he has a passion for Magic. He has a passion for degeneracy. And of course, he has a passion for audio-visual editing. So if you have your own channel or you have a project you'd like Tyler to work on, or you want to reach out and maybe provide some feedback on how we can improve or what you like, hit them up. We want to know how we can do better, because if you don't tell us, we're going to keep putting out mediocre content, which might be what they want. They might be onto something there. I might want to tell them, if you don't tell us, we're always going to change. So you have to constantly tell us, and then we'll stay the same.
A little reverse psychology on it.
Yeah. But of course, the free way is just to share the content you're watching and listening to, because every little bit of interaction from the collective does help. So Brews and Builds is our deck tech series. Since we conquered the path to 32, the 12 themes of EDH decks, we have moved on to the classic brew from day one, Brews and Builds, with a traditional episode. We described the brewing of decks similar to how beer is brewed. So we broke it down to 4 different categories. The first one's ramp and setting your board state. We call that grain.
Grains are the foundation of every beer. They include both base malts and specialty malts, usually in a 60-40 ratio. This helps with the color, the taste, and most importantly, the alcohol content of the beer. Decks always need ways to grow, stabilize, and ramp beer to bigger threats. And just like a grain profile, they're usually a mix of staples and specialty cards.
And then we have, how does your board interact with the opponents? We call that hops.
And hops give the beer its patented bitterness and herbal floral flavors. They grow in a variety of strands and helps distinguish subcategories like IPAs. Our help choices help clear and interact with the board so your deck can ultimately do what it wants.
And then we have one of my favorite sections. How does the deck close out, accomplish its goal, or maybe even win the game? We call that yeast.
And I'm pretty sure we have a new record yeast on this episode, but they are living microorganisms that eat the sugar from the grain and poop out alcohol and CO2. It adds alcohol content to carbonation. Without yeast, to be drinking flat sugar water, and without yeast cards, your deck wouldn't meet the goal of actually winning the game.
Then we have shenanigans. This could be pet card synergies, Dracos in the deck that are just kind of fun. We call that spice.
Not every beer or deck has them. Some decks just have one, but spice is another additive to help separate normal stock beer from a specialty one. It could be the pepper that turns a stout into jalapeno stout, or the addition of hops that turn IPA into a double IPA. Not every deck has something that makes it pop, but if it does, is where we talk.
I feel like if this deck was a beer, it would be like, ooh, we're a lemon beer. And then you look at the ingredients, and like lemon's like literally the last ingredient on the list.
This is literally every strain of yeast and like lemon peel. Like zest, no, lemon zest.
Yes.
Lemon zest, yeah.
Just a taste, just a taste.
And then to cap it off, we do have a bottle capping. These are going to be Jim's, BigTuck's, and I's cuts and adds to the deck that are going to be under $5, under $50, and a no-budget recommendation. Don't know why we would talk about it, but we can't talk about mana-only lands. So without further ado, let's get brewing. Obviously, guest month, we got Jim here. So Jim is going to be presenting Sakishima Plays Freaky Friday with Smasher. So this is a Vial Smasher Sakishima of 1,000 Faces deck. So Tuck, there are 2 cards. So I'm going to read off Sakishima, you read off Vial Smasher, and then Jim, why don't you give us some insights into how this build came about, if you've been able to play it in real life, if maybe this is one you own in paper, and just some generic insights. So, Sakishima of 1,000 Faces, 3 colorless blue, legendary creature, human, rogue, mythic. It's a 3/1. It has partner, so you can have 2 of these legends in the command zone if they both have just generic partner, not partner with. And it has some very cool text, especially when it comes to commander. Well, first off, the legend rule doesn't apply to permanents you control. That's pretty bananas. And then the utility of this card is pretty insane. For 4 mana, you may have Sakishima of Thousand Faces enter the battlefield as a copy of another creature you control, except it has Sakishima of 1,000 Faces other abilities. So that's pretty interesting. Why would Jim want something in the command zone, Tuck, that can make copies and legendary rules don't apply? What's the other commander?
Well, maybe because you want multiple of this gal, Vial Smasher the Fierce. And 1 colorless and Rakdos, that's a black and a red for legendary creature, Goblin Berserker, that's also a mythic. Whenever you cast your first spell each turn, Vial Smasher the Fierce deals damage equal to that spell's converted mana cost to an opponent chosen at random. And it also has just your vanilla partner.
So, Jim, before you go into details about the deck, I'm curious your guys' comments on the art for Vial Smasher. What he's holding, is that the Chaos Wand?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'm probably one of very few people out there that actually doesn't look at Magic card art when I play the cards.
What? Oh my gosh.
If you asked me to describe the art on any given card, I could not. I could recognize one from across the table, but I couldn't tell you what's in it.
Wait, I got it. Soul Ring.
It's like a donut, maybe? I don't know.
Any way you cut it, it looks delicious.
So basically what we just found out is Jim is secretly Homer Simpson from The Simpsons. He sees donuts wherever he can. Okay, well, yeah, because I was thinking about it, like, I know Chaos Wand, I don't think it's actual chaos, like what it does, I think. Or is Chaos Wand the one where you turn it into a goat? Or is that the one where you randomly flip off the top and get to play?
That's Transmogrifying Wand, is a goat one. And then this one's the one that's top off of an opponent's deck, and then they exile until you hit an instant or sorcery. So it is chaos, yeah.
So I'm thinking maybe he is holding the Chaos Wand because this is a opponent at random thing. Just interesting. I was kind of looking at it, and it's like, oh, it's this tiny goblin just flinging lightning in a dead-ass forest. Not really sure what's going on there.
Notably, I got wrecked by Chaos Wand in Vegas this past weekend.
Really?
Nice.
Yeah, this guy would just play Chaos Wand, and then anytime something happened that he didn't like, he would just Chaos Wand the blue player and pull a counterspell.
Next level tech.
He was probably accurate. Guys, I'm not playing counter magic. I'm not playing control.
Not playing
but you are, so I am.
Yeah.
So, Jim, how did this deck come about? You know, I know there's a lot of Vial Smasher decks out there in the competitive community. I know I have one. It's a Vial Smasher Thrasios, but Vial Smasher Sakishima, that's interesting. Why did you end up picking this pairing?
Well, originally, so I built this deck when Vial Smasher came out, the original, the original partner pairs. That was what, Commander 2016?
16.
Yep.
Oh, was that long ago? That was like 5 years
Yeah,
ago.
because that's a Trax a year. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so when the original partner pairs came out, I built a Vial Smasher deck. And usually when I build decks, I build them to support a core idea or a core interaction. So I'll pick something that I want to happen in a game, and then I'll surround it, that interaction, with cards that support it and increase the consistency of that happening in game. And I thought it was cute, knowing that Vial Smasher would trigger based on the mana value, or at the time, the converted mana cost of a card. I thought it would be cute to play a whole bunch of cards like Force of Will that have alternate converted mana or alternate mana costs, so that it would donk my opponents for the full ticket, but I wouldn't have to pay full ticket for the spell.
Sure.
So that was the main thrust behind the deck. Originally, I paired it with with Silas Wren.
Okay, yeah.
I actually, and you'll see when we talk about this, when we talk about cuts a little bit later, we'll talk about this. But I used to have an affinity sub-theme in this deck as a means for cost reduction. And so I played things like Mycosynth Golem that would reduce the cost of spells like Spine of Ishsaw. So what would happen is I would have a sack outlet for artifacts, send my Spine of Ishsaw to the graveyard, and then recast it using Silas Wren's ability. So I would connect with an opponent. It would allow me to cast something from my graveyard. Mycosynth Golem would give it affinity, and I'd be able to recur things from my graveyard for cheap or free. So that was the main thrust of the deck.
So I definitely saw the discard theme throughout the deck pretty prevalent, but I didn't see a ton of payoff for the graveyard, so that makes sense that that's a little left over from Silas Wren. And I'll even say my bottle capping for my no budget recommendation, it's going to help you kind of recycle some of that stuff, because I could see that maybe, and you could tell me if I'm wrong, but I could see that maybe being a crutch of the deck is you're discarding cards, you're slinging people for damage, but then eventually you just kind of run out of gas, and it's not like either of your commanders draw cards on their own. So then it's, for me, I'm one of those players that I don't like discarding to discard, because then I look at this graveyard, and if I don't have a way to play it, it's like, oh, there's 50 cards that I'll never see again because I don't play Graveyard Recursion.
Yeah, so it's kind of when I built this deck, there were two overlapping synergies. One was a direct synergy with Vial Smasher saying, we are going to cast spells for alternate mana costs and get Vial Smasher's trigger for cheap. And then the other one is a CMC Matters theme. So things like Heretics Punishment and what's a Riddle of Lightning, where it just cares about the CMC of the card. The Combustible Gearhulk came a little bit later, and that was a good addition. And so it was kind of these two overlapping synergies that said, these play really well in the same deck. They're not technically the same thing, but it's just sort of a CMC Matters theme all around. That's interestingly also why the deck does not play Sol Ring. Because when I built the deck, I decided that Sol Ring didn't cost enough for what it did. So I wanted to stay away from it. There's only one drop in the entire deck. But I do, instead of Sol Ring, play the Border Posts, which are horrendously bad, and you should not play them.
I tried to play the Border Post game, and they have gotten cut out of every deck I put them in.
They donk people for 3, though, with Vial Smasher.
That is true.
I'm gonna start using that phrase now. I've never heard the phrase donk people. I'm gonna start saying that now. Like, hey, I'm just gonna donk you for 3. Just don't worry about it.
We say it a lot. We say it a lot.
I love it.
Donk.
Oh yeah,
like
Tuck's all about the just a taste.
I just want to taste. Just a taste. I just want to taste.
So from a deck stats perspective, it's something that we always enjoy doing. The deck right now is sitting a shade above $2,000, but we do have Aber duels in, so that's why. Very easy to figure that out. From a breakdown, we got 34 lands, we got 16 creatures, 16 instants, 18 sorceries, 7 artifacts, 9 enchantments. I noticed no planeswalkers. They got some expensive ones. There's Ugin. He's an 8. I think Karn might be an 8 or a 7. They're up there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I didn't, mostly because they had no mechanism for reducing the cost of planeswalkers that I cast. But yeah, no planeswalkers. And originally, in terms of the cost, this deck was actually a cards that I own deck. When I originally built this deck, I bought $80 worth of cards.
Nice.
To build it.
Nice.
So that was a long time ago. That was 5 years ago now. And those cards that I bought for $80 at the time are worth significantly more than that now. But this was an $80 deck that it cost me at the time to build it.
Wow.
Nice. That's awesome.
So, but there's no way you had the Aber duels in and the total value of the deck was $80.
No. I purchased $80 worth of cards to add to cards that I already own.
I didn't have a similar thing, but I did have a similar of bought a card for cheap and all of a sudden you find out it's worth a lot. It happened at our Drinkathon. I had my hand accidentally fell through the deck slats on my deck. And so we had to have our friend and patron single Aaron crawl under the deck because he's like $135, $145 probably. A lot smaller than me and Tuck.
It's like that scene from Forrest Gump where they like give him the gun and the flashlight and have him like go into the trenches in Vietnam. It was it was very traumatic for him as well.
And so I couldn't really remember what was in my hand because it was a little later in the night. He brings the cards out. And I didn't realize it. I knew I owned the card. I didn't realize it had spiked to $2,000. The Judge version of Survival of the Fittest is now like a $2,000 card. I think I bought it for $100 like 2-3 years ago. So yeah, that was kind of like a Thanksgiving present. Half tempted to sell it.
that you didn't lose.
Yeah. But from a CMC perspective, Tuck, what's the CMC look like? How do we look like from a color pie breakdown? What's a little bit there?
So I am trying to find the color pie bit, but we do have a main board. The average mana value is 361, which is pretty solid comparative to how many top end things you have. And is there a color pie on here that I'm missing?
Yeah, there is. It's just at the bottom. So basically from, and this is something, Jim, we've started to do ourselves just because we've been playing Magic way longer than we've been creating content, is look at our color pie from what our lands produce to what the actual mana we need, and are we aligned? And so right here, it's showing that you have about 24% of your deck can produce blue, but you need 35% blue access. Your deck can produce 38 or 35% of black, but you need about 26% for the deck. And it looks like you could produce about 41% of red, and your deck needs about 39. So it seems like your red's about there. When you've played this, have you ever seen where you've been maybe black flooded and short on blue?
So it's interesting because the deck is so linearly focused on Vial Smasher. The priority in the early game is to get black red out in your first 2 turns. So that is the reason for the overrepresentation of black and red. Yeah. But the mana costs can be extremely misleading in this deck because a lot of the time I'm not paying to cast these spells.
Sure.
So although there is a mana pip on something like Submerge, I don't know if I've ever cast that for 5, right? That's a free spell, right? Similarly, Mindbreak Trap has 2 blue pips on it. I would never pay mana for Mindbreak Trap. I'm not leaving up 4. The border posts have blue pips on them. So there's at least probably half a dozen to maybe 10 pips on here on the blue side of the pie that I'm not actually casting. Yeah, it might be a little off. I have made some changes to the deck recently, but didn't change the mana base. So it could be a little bit off. I haven't played it too much. I played it a few times in Vegas and then once yesterday on stream. And it felt fine, but...
Gotcha. Yeah, it's a question we always ask, even each other, because, sometimes you do have a deck and it's like, God, I never seem to get red. And then you finally put it out online. You're like, oh, I got like 5 ways to make red, and I need 15 red pips throughout the deck. So it's always a curious one, but it makes sense. If your sole focus is, I need to get Vial Smasher out by turn 2 at the earliest or latest, you need black and red in that opening hand or on your next draw, or you're just... not really. You're already behind the curve, so that totally makes
typically
sense.
When I'm mulliganing for very land-heavy hands. I'm looking for 5 lands if possible. 5 lands is beautiful with this deck because, like you said, because the card velocity is in terms of casting velocity. I'm not casting 5-6 spells per turn. At any point during the game, I'm maybe casting 1 spell per turn. It's a much different story. As long as you can make your land drops late into the game, then you're set.
Interesting. Well, let's get into this thing and start with the grain section. Jim, we always like our guests to start us off. What card do you think in a Vial Smasher Sakishima deck that you've kind of put together, what's the first key grain that people should be looking at?
I would say this kind of plays double duty, but I really like Spinerock Knoll.
Oh, all right.
It's not a it is a land. It's not quite as sexy as a lot of other cards, but the thing that I like about Spinerock Knoll is that it's trivially easy to trigger the trigger condition, which is one of your opponents takes 7 damage in a single turn. And it just allows you to cast whatever you put under it for free, which allows you to trigger Vial Smasher again. So you can trigger this off of your opponents attacking each other. You can trigger it off of a Vial Smasher trigger. You can just toss something under it to use later. Most of the time, like the benefit of this deck is because it is like mono bombs. You can toss a 9-drop spell under it, right? Or an 11-drop spell under it and just be like, oh, Temporal Trespass. Somebody took 7 damage, so I'm going to take an extra turn. I would say that would be my first one. That is one of the strongest cards in the deck, I would say, just because of the quality of card that you can put under it.
So I agree with all points you make, except one, and it's like a 1A. When you kind of talk about you drop like you talk about like a mono bomb under there, use it to get a Vial Smasher trigger. I mean, it seems like Spinerock Knoll, you're only going to have I guess if you could take all your opponents, you have a 66% chance to do it and get a Vial Smasher trigger, because I would think the 7 or more damage would probably happen from a Vial Smasher trigger, and then if you had an extra turn spell, you're just casting it to get the extra turn spell.
You're not going to double trigger.
So do you ever, though, I guess my question is, do you ever hold off? When you do a Vial Smasher trigger, you get the 7 damage, and it's like, I could do the Knoll, but I'm going to lose out on the damage I have underneath. Do you ever just hold back and I know one of my opponents is going to deal 7 eventually?
It depends on what I put under it. If it's in my opening hand, as an example, right? I'm looking at the top 4. It's not like you can go through your entire deck and pick what's under it. But a lot of the time it'll just be like a mana rock, or it'll be a permanent that I want on board that's going to give me enduring value, like Sin Prodder or Havoc Festival or something like that. In which case I would just want to get them out ASAP. I don't want to wait. A lot of the time with the things that I'm using to proc Vial Smasher triggers, they also have a really splashy effect that I'm not complaining about at all. Like I've got something like Blast of Genius, right? That card's just Ancestral Recall, and it deals damage. So putting that under Spinerock Knoll, it's not the end of the world if I don't get the 6 damage from the Vial Smasher trigger, because it's still probably going to do 10 damage and draw me 3 cards.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Well, my first one, I mean, I'm just a dirty little boy when it comes to tutors. And I saw very early on when I was looking through your deck list, I saw the trickery you're doing with your hybrid mana and Vial Smasher. Mm-hmm. So this one involves the Queen and me and Tuck.
Let's go!
3, 2, 1. Beseech the Queen.
The Queen! Woo! 2 colors, 2 colorless, 2 colorless, or black, black, black. Sorcery. That's it. It's uncommon for $2.60.
Search your library for a card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. I feel like you and I are in agreement on this. This card basically is a 1 mana worse demonic tutor that's going to hit someone for 6.
I completely agree, and I think it's funny that like this has been a card that I've always liked a lot, and my other one that I'm talking about fits this as well. But I keep putting it into decks where like it doesn't really get the value. The argument I've heard is like you put it in mono black decks because you get the nut draw of like turn 1 land, dark ritual, soul ring, or mana crypt or whatever, like right out the gates. That's also what we call Magic Christmas Land. But I think like this one, when I first looked at it, I was like, okay, interesting choice. But then again, after looking at a different card, I was like, oh, it's actually just ding someone and you tutor something. And also with your strat of saying like, you're keeping your 5 landers, that makes a lot of sense. Has there ever been a time though, because you are dictated by the amount of lands that you control, where you really want to cast this, but you like want to hold off because you just don't feel like there's going to be something that you want to go get? I
honestly will still cast it.
Oh, sure. just take 6. Yeah.
Yeah. If you've got both Vial Smashers out, it donks for 12, right? So
yeah.
It's enough. If you consider the fact that like you could pay 3 mana and cast a creature and you're not going to get in for 6 damage, maybe not even over the course of the game with that card, right? But you can reveal it to other stuff. You can discard it to, again, keep going back to Blast of Genius because I love that card. But yeah, you can reveal it, you can pitch it, you can do a whole bunch of other stuff with this card that doesn't involve casting it. But sometimes, if I just got to get some damage out there, I'll just cast it anyway. Go get a land, go get Vampiric Link is, a good one to make the game go a little bit longer if everybody's kind of in free fall. But the main thrust of this deck is just pump out as much damage as possible. It doesn't matter what direction it's going. Eventually, everybody will die,
Just like real life. It's funny.
Yeah.
That's the same thing I told my therapist a few weeks ago. So.
Yeah. Everything sucks and nothing matters, right?
Yeah, right. So just burn it all down.
All right, Tuck. Well, give us your last grain card.
This was another one that actually you just mentioned, Jim, which is another one that works really well in this deck because it effectively just does double duty. And it's another card I've always liked, but have never really found something except for Rakdos, Demon, and Devil Tribal. So you mentioned earlier Sin Prodder. What an all-star in this deck in particular. So 2 colorless and a red for a 3/2 creature devil. It's a rare for about 30 cents. It has Menace, which I'm guessing is effectively a blank piece. But at the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library. Any opponent may have you put that card into your graveyard. If a player does, it deals damage to that player equal to that card's converted mana cost. Otherwise, put that card into your hand. So I love this. We've talked a lot about on the podcast how we love opponent modal choices, right? Like, oh, we're making you take the opponent. And I think it's also ironic that this accomplishes the same sort of damage potentially that a Vial Smasher would for the same mana cost, right?
Oh, it sure does.
So like that's, again, like I've always liked this idea of this value, but there's never been a deck that I've really liked it in. And I could see this from the turn you play it. The next upkeep, it's already going to start donking people left, right, and center, making people make choices, all that sort of stuff, which is the kind of games I like to see.
My only complaint on the design, though, is I wish it was designed like Combustible Gear Hulk, where I wish it would be at the beginning of your upkeep, an opponent may have you mill the top card. If not, reveal it. They take damage and you put it to your hand. Sure. I would like it to where they don't get to see that you're getting an expropriate or something like that. I think that would be a little bit more fair, to be frank, because it is a 3/2. It does get lightning bolted pretty easy. But this actually was a cutting block card for me. But I started looking through it. I found another card, and I was like, okay, I think this is actually still good to go in, because I think with my final capping, it's a bit of a nut card, but it'll allow you to constantly reuse everything in your graveyard. And I think you leave all the stuff that puts stuff into the graveyards, because I think we could turn your graveyard into a second hand if we do a little bit of tweaking. So yeah, I really like Sin Prodder.
Yeah, this card is a certified all-star in this deck. I am
Nice.
literally never unhappy to see this card. One of the things that I think is really funny is when I play this deck and against people that haven't played it very often, they think they're really clever by paying 0 to put lands in my graveyard. And until I delve them away.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And but again, because the deck doesn't have a ton of card velocity, it can have trouble hitting delve costs, right? So if I want a Temporal Trespass or Treasure Cruise or Dig Through Time or whatever, having those lands in the graveyard is actually awesome. It's, if you want to take 8 to send something that costs 8 to like a Breaking and Entering to my graveyard, that's fine. That means I don't have to cast it and deal you 8 that way, right? Or I can draw it and then cast it and get the value and still hit you for 8. And then the cheaper stuff, if they want to send it to my graveyard, that's fine. It just gets that out of the way and I can draw more gas.
See, I'd look at the other way. I would be like, but you know what? If I take 8, then I'm just taking 8. But if I let him cast it, there's a 33% chance, 66% chance I don't take 8. Mm-hmm. That's math right there. 100% versus 33% chance
the numbers
to take
don't lie.
They don't lie.
It suits me just fine. If you want to take damage, go for it. Please do.
The numbers don't lie like my hips don't lie. Well, Jim, what is your final grain card?
This one's my MVP, and I debated making this a yeast card because it tends to kill people. But Pyromancer's Goggles is my second grain card. This is a mana rock. It's a 5-mana mana rock, and it makes 1 red mana. And when you spend that mana, it copies whatever spell you're casting. If that spell is a red instant or sorcery.
Yep.
And again, in the vein of red certified all-stars, this one is bonkers. There are so many good targets to copy with this. Cruel Ultimatum. What else we got here? Kaboom is another good one. I always love double kabooming. Anyway, basically any red spell. The split cards, as long as you cast the red half, you can double that as well. And you get the whole card. Calibrated Blast. There's just like a ton of red spells that I want to copy in this.
Bombs.
Yeah.
Bunch of donks. Bunch of donks. And the best part is, due to a recent reprinting, this card's actually affordable because it used to not be. This used to be like $10 or $15, which again in this deck is a pittance. But for us BTLs, if you will, it's now 88 cents. So there's really no reason to run it if you're trying to play the red Spellslinger gimmicks.
Yeah, so the thing about Pyromancer's Goggles is sequencing can be kind of tough in this deck because you always want to front load your expensive spells, which is generally the opposite of the way you want to play it normally. Because if you've got mana rocks in your hand, like Sol Ring or whatever, you want to roll those out because they're going to make mana for later in your turn. Mm-hmm. Or even if you have like mana rocks that aren't net positive, you still want to roll them out because you kind of get a refund on them if you can use them that turn if they ETB untapped.
Yep.
But I never feel bad about casting Pyromancer's Goggles as my first spell per turn when Vial Smasher's out because it's still going to donk for 5, and then I can use it later on in the turn or at instant speed at some other time. Yeah.
So question for you guys. Do you think Pyromancer's Goggles would be as good if it was 3 mana and there was no period? It was add a red and it was only for casting a red instant or sorcery, and it still does the copying and everything. You just wouldn't have the flexibility to use it for other stuff. At 3 mana, do you think you'd still run it?
That's an interesting one. I think I would snap run it in this deck, but probably not in other decks.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it really depends on what you're playing. Because in some ways, I think if you sequence it, like you were saying, Jim, you're always going to want to use it to copy a red instant or sorcery to some extent. Yeah. And like the red mana is just going to be, if you're desperate, I suppose. I don't know, I'd still run it in here for sure.
Yeah, my thought was just like it costs 5 mana, so it is like technically an expensive mana rock. Like we rip on Gilded Lotus for being 5 and only producing 3. So that's where it was just like, well, like, and I run Pyromancer's Goggles in like my Neheb deck, and I think that's it. But yeah, and for me, it's just always been like 5 mana, and I get it. It does give me a red I can use for other stuff. But I think I would almost run it more if it was 3 mana, but the red could only be used for instants and sorceries, and I still get the copy. I think that would actually, for me, be more playable than 5, use the red for anything.
Yeah, and I was talking to Glenn Jones about, Glenn Jones, one of the senior developers for Commander products at WotC. He was on my podcast a little while ago. We were talking about 3 mana rocks because one of the questions I asked him was, what is a success? If you say, I designed a card, that card was super successful, what do you consider it to be a success? Like if you print a card and it's like run in 70% of decks on EDH Rec? Is that a success? And he said, no, it's not about the absolute number. It's about increasing diversity in that card's like archetypal slot. So if they're releasing a 3-mana rock, they don't want everybody to run this rock. Mm-hmm. They don't want Arcane Signet. That's why when you hear Gavin Verhey say Arcane Signet was a mistake, it absolutely was. Yeah. But when they release something cool at the 3-mana slot, like Midnight Clock or like Cursed Mirror or whatever, these like big time upside mana rocks in the 3-mana slot, it increases diversity and especially color gating them. More people are running different 3-mana rocks, and that's a huge success from WotC's perspective.
Gotcha.
So I could definitely see them coming out with something like that, because I happen to know that they do like 3-mana rocks for Commander, and that there's a ton of utility that you can put on 3-mana rocks.
Yeah, for sure. Nice. I mean, you could even do a black one where it's like, add a black, this mana can only be used to like sacrifice a creature. Or, something like that. Yeah. Like, there could be a lot of cool, if they wanted to do like a mono block, add a white, this can only be used for, I don't know, piddling around and passing your turn because that's all white
gaining
does.
Life.
All right. Well, my last grain is probably, for me, the sexiest card in the deck. I love this thing. Let's just talk about Dream Halls for a second. Let's just talk about it. 3 colorless blue enchantment. Instead of paying the casting cost for a spell of any color, the caster may choose and discard a card that shares at least one color with that spell. If the spell has X in its casting cost, X equals 0. Card's about $65. So I love this card because it for me, in your deck, it does 2 things. One, it allows you to donk people for a lot with paying nothing. That's pretty great. Mm-hmm. But then the second thing is when you try to donk someone without paying nothing, and then your opponent tries to counter it paying something, or potentially paying nothing, you could then also counter it for paying nothing. And it becomes this discard battle of, do you have the matching color in your hand, and how much of your hand are basic lands or artifacts? I absolutely love this thing, because for me, it's only a win for you. And you know what? If one of your opponents plays a free Atraxa or Jace the Mind Sculptor or Liliana, it's like, hey, good for you. You did it. Mm-hmm. Great. I'm going to donk you for 12 next turn. Let's go.
Yeah. Well, and then also, like, who runs 2 8-drops in their decks? Not a lot of people, actually. Once you get up to the top end of the like the curve, people are unlikely to have 2 matching bombs in their hand, This deck, though, quite frequently will have 2 6-drops or 2 7-drops.
Well, so you don't have to match the CMC. You just have to match the color.
Or match the color, yeah.
So if they had like a counter spell, they could discard counter spell, play expropriate for free. That's my kind of play right there.
Notably, it disproportionately disadvantages 5-color decks because, again, you're less likely to have matching color cards in your hand.
And artifact decks.
Yeah, exactly. I've played this with artifact decks at the table, and oh boy, they get sad. They're the only one paying full ticket for their spells.
Well, guys, we are not sad because we're happy, and we're moving from the grain section on over to the hop profile. And BigTuck, I want you to start. Why don't you give us your first hop card that you think would be worth talking about in this deck?
You brought this up earlier because this card would normally confound me. You brought this up at the top of the cast. And Jim, you'd mentioned this, but Logic Knot is a really, really interesting and fun card to play around in here. X blue for a common instant. It's about 5 cents, and it's got Delve. So each card you exile from your graveyard while casting the spell pays for 1. And then it's counter target spell unless its controller pays X. So one thing I really like about this, and MrCombo and I have talked about these sort of like counter spell pay X, and it's really like it can go to the player saying like, well, is it worth it to tap out and all these other things, right? It kind of makes them think. What I like about this one is you just make this arbitrarily large. Who cares if they can't pay for it ever unless they're playing some sort of infinite mana thing? Like Logic Knot for 12 is just equally as good, or is better in this case, than Logic Knot for 4 at the same rate, right? It gives you something to do with your graveyard if people do like take Sin Prodder damage or some of these other things. It's instant speed, so you get the trigger off of Vial Smasher, obviously. Just a really fun design space to put in these like giant X donk cards.
So something we do with our guests all the time is we always ask, A, has this ever worked like you wanted? And B, has it ever backfired? So now here I am to ask, A, have you ever Logic Knotted for like 20 on a Soul Ring? And has Logic Knotted ever backfired because you delved away your whole graveyard and they countered your counter?
So I have done a few things like that. Counter actually doesn't matter when I'm countering it for 20. You still get the Vial Smasher trigger. That's why it's in the deck. But I have countered an arbitrarily small spell with an arbitrarily large X value to kill people.
Nice.
Especially when it's down to 1v1, when you're heads up near the end of the game, you top deck Logic Knot, and you're like, this is great. I just have to sit and wait until they do something, and it doesn't matter what they do. Like, I'm going to cast Kodama's Reach, and you're like, Logic Knot for 20, you're dead.
And then they're like, wait, I'm going to Supreme Verdict. And you're like, oh, sadness.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Force of will.
It actually doesn't matter. You can still target Supreme Verdict.
Yeah, true.
Oh, that's
But it just doesn't counter it.
Yeah.
But again, it doesn't matter. That's not why you're doing it.
It's on cast, sure.
And that's actually going to lead into mine when we talk about that in a sec.
Well, so you wouldn't be able to cast Logic Knot with Supreme Verdict on the stack because it's uncounterable. Spell can't be countered.
You can target Supreme Verdict with Logic Knot, but when Logic Knot resolves, it doesn't counter Supreme
I
Verdict.
just figured it was an
I
invalid
didn't know
target.
that. Yeah, I didn't know that either. I thought you just couldn't cast counter spells.
Yeah, it doesn't have hexproof or anything like that. So,
Yeah,
Cool.
Cool.
Well, Jim, you kind of teed it up. What's your hop card?
Okay, so we're talking about Disrupting Shoal.
Yeah, we are.
This card is wild. So we just talked about being able to cast counter spells targeting uncounterable stuff.
Yep.
This is a different flavor of that. And if you're familiar with Pyroblast, this came up on our gameplay episode 2 weeks ago, where I cast Pyroblast targeting a Necropotence. And for those of you unfamiliar, Pyroblast says you can counter a spell if it's blue, or destroy a permanent if it's red. Now, what that means is that you can target anything, but it only does something if the conditions are met.
Huh.
Now, Disrupting Shoal has the same wording. So you can target a spell with any converted mana cost on the stack, which means you can pitch any card to Disrupting Shoal in response to any spell that somebody casts, right? So what this allows you to do is when somebody's just, taking their turn or whatever, you can be like, Disrupting Shoal, I'm going to pitch Temporal Trespass for 11, and it will trigger Vial Smasher for 13. For free. It's discard a card, deal 13 damage. And then people are like, oh, and my spell's countered? And they're like, no, you can keep your spell, just take 13.
Oh my gosh.
Keep it.
So the whole Shoal cycle is like that.
Yeah,
the whole Shoal cycle is like that. But Disrupting Shoal just has a really interesting rules loop. It's not really a loophole, it's like a corner case where you wouldn't ever do this if you were playing Magic correctly. But if you're playing Vial Smasher Sakishima Magic, it's almost always correct to just pitch something big in response to a spell to proc Vial Smasher.
I'm not gonna lie, that kind of sounded like a band name, like the Vial Smasher and the Sakishimas. Sounds terrifying. I don't like it because it seems like lots of burning is gonna hit my face.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, my second one, because I had Disrupting Shoal as well, I like this because this is a true hop card, but it is so... I could see how this would be great for probably your play group, Jim. You guys seem like you have some experienced players, probably people that have been in the game for an extended period, probably have duels of some way, shape, or form. They don't have to be Abers, but they could be Shocks or whatnot. So Massacre seems like a very cool card that probably works a lot in your group. I don't know if it would work, Tuck, in the Kansas City group, if we would always have someone with a Plains, but Massacre, 2 colorless black sorcery. If an opponent controls a Plains and you control a swamp, you may play Massacre without paying its mana cost. All creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. The reason I really like this deck is, Jim, your deck is very similar to how I build my decks. I build it with an idea or a commander in mind, and I'm going to take all the cards and they are going to culminate around that thought or idea. Mm-hmm. With that, though, with decks like this, where you need your commander, and it's not like you're winning through red zone damage or winning through other means. Your number one nemesis is go wide. Token decks, probably, if they go quick, destroy you. So something like Massacre that potentially you could cast for free, and yes, you could donk someone for 4, but I think it's just more important to do the all creatures get -2/-2 for no mana investment, because you could even spend all of your mana for your first spell, getting the big Vial Smasher thing, then hey, for free, I will go ahead and do this and do the -2, so that way I maxed out my turn.
And most importantly, Vial Smasher is a 2/3.
Yep.
Ooh, there you go.
So it always lives.
Not only does it clear
Still
the board,
alive.
it will live. One thing I will say about mana bases, though, even without alpha, beta, revised duels, I will say that Massacre and the other one, Submerge, are getting worse over time. I would suspect that if you were to do some sort of data, and maybe I'll reach out to EDH Rec and see if they want to do an episode about this. But my prediction would be that mana bases are getting more singleton over time. I do think that people are moving towards more colors because mana bases are, it's cheaper to make good mana bases than it was 3, 4, 5 years ago. The recent sets, duels, have been very good. And they've been reprinting, like things like the Battle Bond lands. You know, if you play a 5-color deck, you can pick up 1 copy each of the Battle Bond lands and end up with like a very good mana base with Battle Bond lands, shocks, and the rest in basics, you know?
Yeah.
So I would suspect that if you like plotted it out over time about how many unique lands are in an average deck, I would say that that number is going up over time, and Submerge is getting worse because fewer of them have land types.
Oh, interesting. Hadn't thought of that. I mean, I've always looked at these cards and I've always seen it as way too risky for my taste, just because of our play group. And it was more because they did a lot of what I call the bad dual lands, so the enter-tapped or scry lands, stuff like that, guild gates, or it's basics. And so it's like, man, I don't want to depend on you. Even like forest walk and stuff isn't something we really do a lot in our play group unless you're going to play that new card from Modern Horizons 2, Yavima, whatever, Cradle of Growth.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Yeah, that'd be cool stat to see. Like when Submerge and Massacre came out, how many decks maybe they were in roughly at that time, and then just over time, how do they just deplete to where maybe they are under 100 decks now or under 500 decks.
And actually, I'll hop in on this because Submerge was going to be my second pick. So since we're talking about it anyways, I can just like read out what it is. 4 colorless and a blue. If an opponent controls a forest and you control an island, you may pay it without paying its mana cost, and you just put a target creature on top of its owner's library. I actually like Submerge more than Massacre. I'll actually be talking about Massacre a little bit later for that exact reason that MrCombo was just discussing. I think the chance of you playing an opponent that has a forest and you controlling an island in this certain matchup is more likely to happen. But I think they're kind of interchangeable to some extent of like, if your meta is more token dependent, then Massacre is probably better. If you're playing things that are more commander heavy or like more big Voltron-y stuff, Submerge is probably a little bit better. I just like Submerge a little more for the forest than the plains.
Well, what does it do?
Oh, I'm sorry. You put target creature on top of its owner's library.
Yeah, I would say that it's almost a certainty based on the games that I've played in blind metas and in my meta. It's almost a certainty that one of your opponents will have an actual factual forest out.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I will say, though, I also think Submerge, though, has inherently gotten worse ever since they got rid of the Tuck rule with Legends. Because I was about to say, I mean, man, instant speed for free, your Vampiric Tutoring. Okay, your commander goes on top of your library. What do you want? Do you want your commander on top that you get to draw it, or do you never want to see it again? You don't really get that luxury anymore.
Yeah.
God, those days sucked. Oh,
Yeah,
that was rough. All right. Well, Jim, I think you're the last one. What is your final hop card?
Oh boy, it's a spicy one. The card that I'm picking is Psychic Battle.
Oh, God.
Sure, yeah.
Psychic Battle is a mess. It's actually a hot mess. It's a 5-mana enchantment, 3 blue. Whenever a player chooses one or more targets, so it triggers whenever somebody targets something. Each player reveals the top card of their library. Player who reveals the card with the highest mana value may change the target or targets. If 2 or more cards are tied, target remains unchanged, and changing targets this way doesn't trigger abilities of permanents named Psychic Battle, which prevents it from triggering off of itself. This card is a mess. Basically what this means is, you cast Lightning Bolt on my Birds of Paradise, Psychic Battle triggers, we all flip the top card, we reveal, we don't exile them. The person who flips the biggest card gets to reselect the targets or leave it the same. And the cards stay on top. You just get to, until somebody draws, right? Or fetches or whatever.
Sure.
So the cool part about this is, you would be shocked at how many things actually target time stretch targets. There's a whole lot of cards that target, and this actually provides counterspell protection for stuff because counterspells target.
Oh, interesting.
So whenever somebody counters something, you can just redirect it to counter something else. And yeah, people can roll the dice with this card and one that I'm going to talk about later. It's the kind of thing where it doesn't work every time, but I'll win this flip probably 60 to 70% of the time after it's out.
Wow. That's pretty good.
60 to 70% of the time it works.
Every time.
And I mean, on the balance, that is enough to totally throw the momentum of a game in your direction, you know?
And Psychic Battle's 5 in and of itself, which is a decent donk just to do something and then have some protection after that.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bizarre card, kind of along the same lines as Dream Halls. I usually, before I cast it, I'll
reread it a few times.
I'll ask people, are we ready to bust the game wide open? Because something big's going to happen. I don't know what it's going to be, but something big is going to happen.
Yeah, it could be something
next.
huge.
Yeah.
What I really like is that you've been able to turn Psychic Battle and Dream Halls, which in my opinion are chaos cards, and you have been able to make them work in a deck. Yes, Vial Smasher in essence is chaos, but this isn't a chaos deck. You're not just like willy-nilly like, oh, let's just see whatever the hell happens, I don't care the result. Like, you have a path and you know how you want the game to go, but you've figured out a cool way to have these cards at least work in your benefit as much as they can do, which is pretty great, because it's always interesting to see these cards. It's like, man, you could only use that in a coin flip deck, and it's like, well, actually, I run it in my Aristocrats deck, and it donks. Here's how. And then you kind of learn new things. So that's really cool.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about another one when it comes to Yeast. So foreshadowing.
Well, I think we're about to sludge on out of the hot profile on over to the Yeast. And I will start this off with a card that I love. So this is where, I think this was precast. Joe was kind of talking to us like, I kind of have different impressions on stuff. And I kind of gave like, grains, hops, yeast kind of mean to me. And this is a card that if this was Tuck's deck, I would ream him, say you're a donk yourself. This is a hops card, but you're a guest, so I'll take it. But also, it's 7 mana, and it's an instant, which is pretty stupid. So we are talking about Fated Return. I think this is an amazing yeast card for this deck specifically. So 4 colorless, black, black, black. It's an instant. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It gains indestructible. If it's your turn, scry 2. So the thing I like the most about this card is A, it's insanely overcosted for what it does. No one would ever run this in any semblance of a tuned deck. B, it's amazing for this deck. Let me take your best creature, and we haven't gotten, because the Yeast has a lot of this, you have a lot of stuff that's like, choose target creature or player for the damage. So you can be, it would be silly for a Vial Smasher player to be sniping out creatures, but I mean, hell, there could be some big fat boys on the field that you, like, hey, I could deal 12 to MrCombo's face, but I'd rather get rid of his Kozilek. That just seems like a better idea for me. So I really like Fated Return because there will be times early mid-game that you're having to pick off stuff, get it to graveyard, do your Spine of Isha rigmarole, and then it's like, hey, I'm saving 7 mana. What do people usually think that is? Cyclonic Rift. Let's just keep it there. Let's just see. You guys didn't do anything? All right, 7 mana, Fated Return. Let me take your best creature from any graveyard, put it on my battlefield, and I'll donk you for 7. That's amazing. Now,
And it's indestructible.
I guess my question, and then I'll pass the ball to you, do you ever do this on your turn to get the Scry 2? I get it. They did it as a carrot, so you could try to be fair Magic players, but come on. Who's doing it on your turn?
I have.
I have. Jim.
I have done it when I don't have other options.
Oh, okay.
When I don't have other cards or whatever. Yeah. But usually, one of my favorite things to get back with this is Living Lore. Living Lore is essentially like reanimating a spell. You know what I mean? It's like you get this creature to play, you exile a card from your graveyard, and then whenever the creature deals damage, you can cast the exiled spell. So one of the things I really like reanimating Living Lore at instant speed after attackers are declared, because you can just flash in a blocker.
Yep.
Oh, sure.
And then it deals damage, you sacrifice it, and then you like Cruel Ultimatum somebody, right?
There it is.
It's back.
The only target.
Yes. The Cruel Ultimatum is my favorite card in this deck, like by a pretty large margin. But yeah, I have cast it on my turn. It's like,
it has to be a feel bad, right?
The Scry 2 is weird. Like, I don't know what the flavor is behind that. It's like, I don't know.
I think it does matter in this deck, though, because I think, including what my hops card, there is a fair amount of stuff of like draw X of these cards, deal damage equal to the ones you drew, or like things on top of the library. So I don't think it's incidental. I agree, though, you wouldn't want to cast it just for that reason.
And I'll say this, if they were trying to give you a carrot, do it on your turn, I think a better flavor for black would have been do all of that stuff, lose 5 life, unless it's your turn.
Oh, yeah.
That would have been more flavorful, because then it still applies to 60 card formats. Like, oh god, 25% of my life total if I do it on their turn. Do I want to do that? And then for us commander players, I mean, the 5 life isn't a big deal, but it's still something to where it's like, well, maybe I do save it for my turn. That could be a cool thing.
Yeah.
for
Much
sure.
bigger carrot, for sure.
All right. So that was pretty spicy there. Tuck, what's yours?
I'm going to save the best for last, because I think Jim and I are going to go 2 for 2 on this one. But this one I think is really fun. And I think, MrCombo, if you're building more graveyard stuff, this is the kind of thing that we're going to want to see, and it's really going to work well into it. So I'm really excited that you decided to go that way. Jim mentioned earlier, Heretics Punishment, I feel like can do a bunch of damage. So 4 colorless and a red for an enchantment. It's a rare for 15 cents. I also love the price disparity between
foil and
cards
non-foil
we talked about. Yeah. Notice like the cards we talked about and the price of the deck. 3 colorless and a red. Choose target creature or player. Then put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. It deals damage equal to that, or deals damage to that creature or player equal to the highest converted mana cost among those cards. So for me, I think this is obviously something that's going to donk probably someone in the head for a bunch. I like that it's repeatable, and I could see this kind of being a late game backup for Vial Smasher if there's only 1 or 2 people left. Instead of paying 6 or 8 or whatever, I guess it'd be 7 or 9 for Vial Smasher. Instead, you can just kind of repeatedly do this at a disadvantage, but then start burning people out pretty quickly as well.
Disadvantage? Maybe he just adds Labman and just decks himself.
Then that's it. Just run it through. The fourth secret tech: artifact, affinity, big creature spells, and then Labman win.
And Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Constellation.
Yeah, of course.
That's it.
Of course, obviously.
The interesting thing about this card is that it doesn't cost you a card to activate it, right?
Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing, and you mentioned this earlier. It's a tough thing to be in a deck that doesn't have a lot of card draw, and so exactly like you mentioned in the late game, you're casting this. It donks for 5 when you cast it, and then you can activate it multiple times. It's just a good way to pump damage out there in the late game when you just have nothing else to do if you're hellbent or whatever.
And I would say I would be very anti that card unless I had my final bottle capping card, because I hate just 3-4 cards. It's just a lot to go through. But I mean, I'm seeing the point, Jim, that you've made of, well, these other cards are just doing Vial Smasher. It's just doing it a different way. And I think that's pretty cool that you've basically made over half of your non-lands try to be a version of Vial Smasher. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Jim, what is your first Sheath card?
Okay, so we're talking about Time Sifter.
Yeah, we are.
We telegraphed this from earlier in the episode.
5 colorless for an artifact. That's for Mirrodin for $1.82.
Time Sifter is basically Psychic Battle, which we talked about earlier in the thing. But instead of getting to reselect targets, you get to take an extra turn after the current turn. So what it does is, actually, I shouldn't say it's like Psychic Battle. Psychic Battle just reveals the top card. Time Sifter exiles the top card so that it's a different card every time. But other than that, it's everybody's revealing the top card in every person's upkeep. Highest mana value gets to take an extra turn after this one. So rather than going in regular turn order, every turn we're going to determine who goes next, right? This card is something. This is actually a card that I call out in my Rule Zero discussions at the beginning of games.
Oh, really?
One of the things you mentioned earlier is actually it's really obvious and it's really pronounced with this particular card, is that normally this would be a chaos card, right? If you assume that everybody is running a deck that's average converted mana cost like 2.5 or something like that, or 3 or whatever the average converted mana cost is in an average deck, you would expect this to run, it's random, but it's roughly evenly split. It's evenly weighted, right? But when you roll up to the party with a deck full of baddies, if you can take 60 to 70% of the extra turns, it's like getting an extra turn, every second or third turn, right? You're just taking half or more of the remaining turns in the game. And it can really throw off turn equity and prevent people from taking turns at all. If you're playing a really tuned deck with a really low converted mana cost, you're just not taking turns.
The only time I've ever seen this card out in the wild was a former player that we knew, Denny, had this Jorah the Get To Chaos deck. And the only time I ever saw this, I happened to be playing my Yuriko Ninja deck. So I was like, all right, I guess I'm just gonna take 4 turns in a row. Like I've got to keep putting high stuff to the top. So I could see you definitely getting into those same sort of blocks. But again, like I don't know, MrCombo. What do you think about the rule 0? Because I still feel like this is beatable to some extent, right?
Yeah, so I think for me, I will say I am probably a content creator that's the most, I don't want to say anti-rule 0, but I think the community, especially us creators, we over accentuate it more than it probably needs to. The same thing with I dropped, me and Jim were talking before we started recording, and I said that before I got on to record, I lit a bunch of matches just to see Twitter go on fire. And one of them also is like, hey, Commander's not casual. Like, sorry, the game has evolved beyond a purely casual game into just, I would call, a game. And Time Sifter is one that if it was everyone reveals the top card, whoever has the high MCMC takes an extra turn after this, and then puts the card to hand, I could see that being a rule 0, because then you can manipulate it enough to where it's like, hey, I'm just going to kind of brainstorm-esque and always make sure I have this big one on top, or second one down so I draw the card. I could see something like that, but the fact that the card gets exiled and you don't have ways in your deck to pull it back from exile, I think it's a beatable card. I think it's more along the same lines as the other cards we've talked about, like the Psychic Battles of the world, and the Dream Halls, where it's just chaos. But you have developed chaos to where it kind of works for you. It doesn't work all the time. It's not like you have a lock on the game. That's where I think a rule 0 conversation potentially could happen. Like the only deck I own that I would do rule 0, and I think Tuck would probably agree with this, would probably be Lavinia. And I think Turns and Burns, I'd let people know, hey, this is CEDH. Like, I've built it to be tuned.
Right. Yeah.
But my Lavinia deck, because it is a 100% Azorius lockdown, that's all it does. I would for sure be like,
it's just stats.
Yeah, I just want you to quit. And so I would tell people, like, hey, if we're just trying to be like annoying as hell, like, I'll do this. But, you know, if there's not something that just inherently prevents people from playing the game, then it's like, you know what? If you want to telegraph what your deck can do, I guess that's good for you, or if you want to do that. But for me, because I came from like a athletic background, so I am competitive, I don't have to win every game, but I don't feel like it behooves me to say, hey, by the way, you know, I have Patrick Mahomes, and second play of the game, we're throwing a Hail Mary to Tyreek Hill on the right side. Just want you to know it's going to come. It'll happen. That's just how my thoughts on it are. But I think this card's completely fair. The card gets exiled. You can't abuse it, that I know of.
Yeah, so it's not the most powerful card in the deck, I will say. It is powerful. The reason why I bring it up, primarily I play Magic against other content creators, specifically for the purpose of making content.
Yep.
And it can be kind of rough content-wise. It can be less entertaining to like knock somebody out of the game early.
Sure.
Right? If you have a long game and you're just like, oh, I'm going to berserk somebody's commander or whatever, and you're just dead 5 minutes into the game, and then it's a 45-minute game, that's just like bad viewer experience. In terms of like blind LGS play, I would probably just say like, this is a deck. I'm playing huge converted mana costs, and leave it at that. And then people can do their own card assessment as I'm playing.
And you know what? I think that's actually perfectly fine. That's like, hey, I'm sitting down with Kalia. It's Angels, Demons, and Dragons. That's what the deck is.
And so when they see Time Sifter and they read it and they're like, oh, well, you're playing all like mono giant converted mana cost cards. This is a threat, right? If as long as I'm giving them enough information and context to accurately do the threat assessment, that's, as far as I'm concerned, all I owe a stranger. When it comes to somebody that's trying to make content, it's a little bit of a different story.
Sure.
And we kind of have to try and, there's like a weird rule 0 conversation that goes on among like streamers and stuff like that, where it's here's the type of tone we're going for.
I'm well aware. And I think honestly, Jim, the biggest issue I have with it from a content creator perspective is the last few times that I've streamed, you know, it's been the rule 0 dialogue, and what it turns into, and you can tell me if you've had different experiences, but the first person that speaks sets the tone for the entire thing. Because it's just like, oh, I'm going to play Neheb, and I'm just trying to get you guys to lose a bunch of life and do a bunch of stuff during second main phase. Oh, well, if you're playing that, I'm going to play this. And I've always been a Magic, what I would call purist, and I want to see random flip it over the top. I don't want you to pick your Reese the Redeemed deck because I'm playing Planeswalkers. Like, that doesn't seem fair. Yeah. But, hey, if we all just flip it over, I think we should just be able to say, hey, do we want the game to end before turn 10, before turn 15, before turn 20? And then you can kind of go off of that.
I think there's like an even split among content creators. Like, It depends on if you're playing against people that you think are going to metagame against you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I definitely wouldn't want to, like, when I'm playing for content purposes, I'm mostly wanting the game to be even. I really don't care about the outcome. Like, the outcome is the least important thing. Like, the most important thing is getting the game filmed.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you've got 4 people. It's going to take 2 hours of your time. That's like a huge time investment from a content perspective, right? Like, we also have a Flesh and Blood channel. Flesh and Blood Blitz games take 15 minutes and they involve 2 people, right? We can film 6 games in 2 hours.
Yeah.
If one of those games goes wrong, we just kill it and we move on, and we still got 5 games filmed, right? Mm-hmm. If we spend all night playing 2 EDH games on camera and we have to kill one of them, that's devastating.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because now we have to have another filming session. We have to get 4 people together for another filming session. We have to make sure that we maximize the chances of usable games, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, most of the time that's just from a technical perspective, right? Like, we want to make sure that in case we weren't running our audio recorder or overhead camera or something like that, that we don't have to totally kill the game. But anyway, this might be a little bit philosophical for what we're talking about today. But we, like, most of the time when I'm playing against my like trusted streaming group and trusted recording group, we're mostly just looking to maximize how even the games are. We're not really looking to like metagame and maximize the chance for winning.
No, that makes perfect sense. I mean, my preference, and I don't know about Tuck, but when I stream, I try to pick decks that are different and weird. Like, I've kind of hit a point in my Magic career, Jim, that I'm no longer focused on building the sexiest new legend. It's more like we did something called theory crafting. I did theory crafting around Garza Zol, the Plague Queen, terrible Grixis legend. And I was like, screw it. I'm going to build the deck, and I'm going to build it to where it's infinite combo. And the only way, though, I can make the infinite combo work is that if Garza's doing combat damage. Because I want to draw my deck with a Lab Man, Fastest Oracle win, but I will only do it if she draws out my deck. So, like, that's the kind of thing that I've hit to where it's like...
It's like an 8-card greasy combo, or like disgustingly dripping sweaty combo, yeah.
Disgustingly greasy, but the deck makes it extremely hard to kind of get to it. And that's kind of where I've hit, and that's the stuff that I want to play. But a lot of times, I can't do that on stream because it's like, oh, well, I'm playing this... blah, 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 Ruach Thar, 8 power deck. That's one of mine. And it's like, oh, all right, I guess I got to play a real deck. I can't just meme around over here.
Yeah. Oh, we're like kindred spirits there. Like, I mean, you mentioned that our deck building methods are fairly similar.
Yeah.
The last deck that I built, a friend on Twitter asked me to help build an oof tribal deck. And I don't know if you ever looked at the oofs, and they suck. There's like 14 of them.
There's one that's okay. The green.
Well, there's a couple.
Right? Yeah.
There's a couple. Collector Oof is good.
Yeah, Collector Oof.
Kitchen Finks is good. Gilder Baron is pretty good. They all do wildly disparate things.
I mean, you do have a grand total of 14 options to work around.
Yes,
so that's a good
you have 14,
right?
and 3 of them are good, and the rest of them are horrendously bad.
Sounds a lot like Richard with his skeleton tribal on Goldfish.
Yeah, right.
So I was like brewing around with this, and I'm like, what do I do as a win con in an oof tribal deck? And I'm like, well, Kitchen Finks combo card, maybe we Kitchen Finks combo. But then I'm like, then we have to run Heliod, and maybe it's just like not an oof tribal deck at that point. It's just a Heliod deck. And then I slept on it, and it came to me in a dream.
Oh, I like it.
And I said, this is...
Our thoughts usually come in the shower.
I said, this like, I'm not joking. It actually came to me in a dream. This is the only time this has ever happened in my Magic life. But I woke up, and I have never included this card in a deck before, ever. But I'm like, for my oof tribal deck, we're going to win with Crater Hoof Behemoth.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
And so I'm like, and then like, I just got the, like, the beautiful mind, like everything floating around.
Yeah.
With like Crater Hoof Behemoth, I'm like, we can run Hero of Bladehold now. We can run everything like O of blank.
Yes.
So, and then I'm like, maybe we expand it. Maybe we go like OUF.
Ooh.
And we can run Camouflage. We can run You Find Some Prisoners. and it gives us a perfect 4-color commander in Kineos and Tiro Uf Meletis.
And the best part about it is that your friend that wants to build this deck, if they build it in paper, they can use the Secret Lair charity edition of Crater Hoof because it is very oof-like and goofy looking.
It is very oof.
Yeah, it does look goofy.
And so you end up with this oof deck that, like, nobody would ever call this an oof tribal deck, but oh boy, is it ever.
The last thing I want to say about oofs real quick is that there's 2 of them that are just children in, like, Halloween costumes, which is very upsetting.
Yeah. Glimmer Baron and Gilder Baron are...
I was going to say, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I spent so much time staring at these damn cards, but anyway.
Oh, man. Well, I have one left. Jim, you talked about it earlier. It ends with an exclamation point. We're talking Kaboom.
Kaboom!
I don't think I've ever
after my own
seen
heart.
this card.
Never heard of this
and
one.
I love it. I'm obsessed.
It's got an exclamation mark.
Well, now I need exclamation deck. Everything that's it doesn't need an exclamation point. You just need the title of the card to kind of scream at you a little bit. So this is a sorcery, 4 colorless red. It's going to do a little bit of donking, but that's not why we have it. Choose any number of target players or planeswalkers. For each of them, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-land card. Kaboom! Deals damage equal to that card's mana value to that player or planeswalker. Then you put the revealed cards on the bottom of your library in any order. This is, once again, backup Vial Smasher. I now